Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's construction clinic. Delighted to welcome you all back. It's great to see lots of familiar names on the list today and some new names, which is even better. By now, I hope you know the format, 30 minutes, quick fire Q&A. We've got a question box on your screens there, so if you have questions for our panelists today, please do send them through the chat box, and we'll try to get through as many questions as possible. We have got a list to start with, so we'll be kicking off with those. But before, as usual, we'll just go through a quick introduction to the ICCP for anybody who hasn't heard of us before. So what is the ICCP? We are a professional members organisation, and we recognise those with skills, qualifications and expertise in the professional management of construction claims. We have three simple objectives, and those are to establish international professional standards for the management of claims, to give recognition to those who have gained appropriate knowledge and experience in the management of claims, and also to help and educate those who would like to gain this experience. So, membership levels, we offer 3 levels of individual membership: associate, member and fellow. Each come with a defined set of criteria that needs to be met in order to gain entry at that level. And depending on where you reside in the world, you may also benefit from fee concessions, which would be a 50% on all fees. So this is to help people in different parts of the world who may not otherwise be able to join. So what do we have to offer in terms of benefits? Well, we have a short video which I'd like to play for you rather than me talking the whole way through. So here's the video. Okay, so hopefully that's given you some food for thought. And if you'd like any more information about the Institute, or you'd like to learn more about us online, you can visit our website and also contact me directly. I'm happy to take any questions and send you more information. Okay, so on to today's panelists. No stranger to these clinics now. I'd like to welcome back Bill Bourdill and Lee Spohr. Bill is a quantum and dispute resolution expert, and Lee is a planning and delay expert. Lee's been having some issues with audio today. We think we've resolved them just before we started, but just in case, please do bear with us. The audio's there, it's just a bit quiet. So as I said, please bear with us, and hopefully it will sort itself out as we go along. So I'm now going to hand over to Bill, who's going to kick things off with the first set of questions.
Thank you for the introduction, Nina. I have 3 questions to go through. I'll start with the first one, which is, how can the adjustment clause be introduced in a situation where there was no price adjustment data table in the original contract, yet the contract period is extended to more than 24 months by the client? This is a situation where it is clear that the contractor is losing money because of the lack of the table and extension of the contract. I'm requesting your guidance on how the adjustment clause and data can be brought legitimately on board. Well, first and foremost, there are two types of delays. There are compensable delays and non-compensable delays. So it would appear to me that this is possibly a compensable delay because it's a delay brought about by the client, either through restricting access or instructing variations to the scope of the works. I need to be a little vague on this because I'm unaware of the form of contract, and I'm also unaware of the jurisdiction around the world where the contract is being performed. I could possibly make an assumption it's a FIDIC contract in the Middle East, but there is nothing to tell me that. What we have to consider here is under what grounds is the extension of time claimable. So I've already made the assumption that it's possibly a compensable delay, and therefore additional payment for prolongation, additional prelims should be forthcoming. Now, there is no mechanism in this contract for this, so the question is asking, how do we deal with that? Well, where there is no price adjustment formula, that would lead automatically to a claim for loss and expense, which might not be the first choice of action by the claiming party. So my guidance, which is what the question is asking for, would be firstly to try and negotiate a fluctuation clause with an agreed basis for calculation. And I'm aware that in the Middle East there are various fluctuation indices available to choose. In the UK, we would use typically the RICS Building Cost Information Service, and that provides a tangible calculation to simply calculate the additional costs without having to go into the depths of proving the additional costs. If it wasn't possible to negotiate a fluctuation clause, then the claiming party would be left with the only remaining alternative to submit a claim for loss and expense. But the problem with submitting a claim for loss and expense is that the claimant would have to prove that the original allowances were reasonable and that the actual costs were properly incurred. Therefore, the fluctuation clause is generally more preferable. Okay, so that's my answer to question number one. Now, question number two is a fairly long question, so bear with me. It's based on FIDIC, the Red Book 99, and the question reads, the FIDIC Red Book 99 subclauses 8.4 and 8.5 are silent about compensation over that period of extension of time. It is allowable to use a specification clause in the contract that expressly states that the tendered monthly sums will be measured for payment over the extended period. Silence is not the same as saying there is no entitlement, when entitlement is expressly provided elsewhere in the contract, nor can an inference be made that overrides an expressed term of the contract. As there is no contradiction and the clauses can be read together, there is no need to provide further consideration for the priority of documents or for the engineer to issue a clarification or instruction to resolve an ambiguity or discrepancy. Well, that was a statement by a DB, so I'm presuming that's a dispute board. And the question is, can I comment on the correctness of this opinion? Well, it seems that the FIDIC contract has been amended with a specification clause. The unamended FIDIC contract would go to actual costs, where costs are claimable. Now, clauses 8.4 and 8.5 are extension of time clauses with no mention of costs. So it can be inferred that costs cannot apply to those clauses because other time-giving clauses also make reference to costs being claimable under those items. So where there is no mention of cost recovery, as in 8.4 and 8.5, one would then generally turn to clause 20.1 and make a claim for loss and expense. That would then open up the gambit of, as I explained in question number one, proving the original allowances were correct and reasonable and the actual costs were correctly incurred. However, in this statement from the dispute board, it makes reference to a specification clause in the contract that expressly states that the tendered monthly sums will be measured for payment over the extended period. So I think in this situation, the contract has been amended, and actually it is the principles within that specification which determine how the loss and expense or the prolongation costs should be recovered. Another alternative would be to price all of your additional prelims within the variation which incurred the additional time. That might be more difficult to do in terms of pricing the variation at the time when you don't necessarily know the full extent of all of the costs. However, it seems to me from what's written here that the FIDIC contract has been amended with a mechanism to provide cost recovery for prolongation. Now, question 2.2 then goes on, presumably on the same contract, to say, when do we decide to use time-related costs stipulated in a contract specification versus actual costs in a FIDIC Red Book 99 application? Which one takes precedence? Is it correct to state that where the actual cost incurred is more or less than the tendered TRCs, or whether the TRCs include for profit is irrelevant, as the parties have agreed that such payment will be in full settlement of the changed compensation or amended general obligations? So I don't actually have all of the information here. I don't have a complete picture to give a complete answer, but it seems to me that the two questions are related and on the same project. And it seems to me that the dispute board has said that the tendered, the time-related costs, or the tendered time-related costs, will provide full settlement, including overheads and profit. So, whereas the unamended FIDIC would lead to cost recovery only, I think that this amended contract would lead to the prolongation of time based on the tendered on the time-related costs. The next question that hasn't yet been asked is, should those costs incur fluctuations or not? But that's another debate. So I now go on to question number 3, which says, what is the criteria for considering contractors' OH&P in its claim for cost? Sometimes it is accepted as cost only, sometimes it included cost and profit, and in some cases overhead and profit. Is there any guidance available to understand this concept? Well, there are basically 3 strands to a prolongation claim, and that would be preliminaries, which are the time-related site preliminary costs, overheads, which is the recovery of unabsorbed company overhead costs, and profit, which is the lost profit not recovered in the time of the delay. So we can see that prelims, the site prelims, are generally a cost recovery item, and that's generally understood. Overheads are a little bit more difficult, and the principle here is that the company overheads from the accounts of, let's say, the previous 3 years or a reasonable average could be taken as being the overheads attributable or that the company was trying to absorb in the period of the delay. But because of the delay, although the company, the contractor, recovered the overheads it had tendered on a net basis, it actually recovered them on a lesser basis per month. Bear with me with this, it's quite difficult to explain, but they're going to recover the same overheads at the end of the contract, but over a much longer period. So actually it's a smaller recovery each month. What that means is by deploying the same resources, they've recovered less overheads per month. So they've absorbed less of their company overheads per month, and therefore they have a loss. Alternatively, you may consider this is the lost opportunity of deploying resources on other projects, and so they absorb more overhead costs per month than they originally planned to do. Now, this assumes, of course, that this is a compensable delay, and this goes back to what I was talking about earlier. If it were...
Camera has completely froze. If people can still hear him, can you just type yes in the chat box, please? Or if you're also having issues, please type no. In that case, apologies, everyone's saying yes. So I've just interrupted. It looks like it's just frozen for me. Sorry about that, Bill.
That's okay.
Okay,
no
I'll mute myself and turn off the webcam and let you get back to it.
Okay, so I think I'd reached the point where I was talking about whether it was a compensable delay or not. So, for example, generally, and again, I haven't got the form of contract or the jurisdiction, so I'm talking in very general terms here, but a weather delay generally is time only, so it's not a compensable delay, whereas delays arising from a variation generally allow for time and money. And that goes back to question 2, which made reference to question 1, which made reference to 24-month delay by the client. That was probably due to variations and therefore a compensable delay. So going back to the question, is the guidance available to understand this concept? Well, yes, the principle is the recovery of absorbed overheads. Now, if we look at prelims, is fairly straightforward because that's a cost recovery. And as I said earlier, most people understand that straightforwardly. Overheads can be calculated from an average of the company's accounts to demonstrate what should have been recovered. Profit hangs out as the most difficult to prove because it's very difficult to prove a profit that you haven't made. What you're trying to prove, what you're trying to establish is the profit that you would have made. So you will need to be able to demonstrate that you've either turned work down during the prolonged period and that work would have generated a profit, and also what the amount of that profit would have been. What you're trying to prove is if this delay had not occurred, there is other work that you would have taken on that would have been more profitable. Now, that is always very difficult to prove. So some companies opt for a formula approach. Some clients drive a very hard bargain and require not absolute proof, but a very high level of proof. And so prelims is usually the easiest to prove. Overheads is fairly easy and tangible from records. Profit is always difficult to prove. And I think that is the guidance I can offer to understand the concept. If that doesn't answer the question, then please feed in another question and I'll deal with that as well.
This answer is useful. Right, just over to the chat box now. We have got about 10 minutes left, so if anybody does have questions, please send them through. I'm just going to switch over to Q&A mode. And we have had a question in from Akira, who has a question about float. So I believe this one's for you, Lee. What is the best way to settle who owns the float in the program, the project or the contractor?
Agree at the start of the project. The one other party you did miss from that question was the employer. Normally it's the employer, project or contractor, which of those owns the float. So I always say that a program is produced for the project and the float is a byproduct of how you've logically linked the program. So if you poorly link the program, there's loads of float. So no one ever programs a project to say, I'm going to have X amount of float on an activity. So I don't see that anyone owns it. It should just be the project because it's a byproduct of how you produce that program. So the best way to settle who owns it is go along those lines. It's the project. The program has produced the float, not either party. And agree at the start, so it's all clear. So I hope that answers it, Akira.
The answer's clear. The problem is that I'm getting a few messages through that people can't hear it. The audio is not great.
I bet still can't.
Akira will send you a response offline to your question. Okay, this one is from Tahir. It's a follow-up to the question that you answered, Bill. So let me just get that into the question box. So what about variations initiated by the employer? Is the contractor entitled for overhead and profit?
Well, again, not knowing the form of contract, I'm giving a very general answer, but my general answer is yes. If it's a variation instigated by the employer, then the contractor generally would be entitled to recover costs plus overhead and profit. Now, that might be from a calculation from rates within the contract, depending on how the variation clause is written in the contract, or it might be a straight case of identifying the actual costs and then allowing a plus factor for overheads and profit. And that's my answer, Nina.
Nina, can you hear Bill?
No.
Right, okay, he's answered it, he's finished.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, if you could, just for everybody's benefit, this is very awkward. I can't hear Bill and he's completely frozen on my screen. So sorry about the disjointed nature of today's clinic. Lee is going to take over as moderator and let me know when Bill has finished answering. Right, question from Rohita. And let me get it in. Okay. When the contract is ongoing and a variation order is issued for additional works beyond the limit of works, is the contractor entitled to preliminaries even though the revised contract sum is within plus minus 20%?
Okay, so yeah, so can you hear me, Lee?
I can, yes.
Yeah, okay, so I'll carry on. I'm not sure why this question says plus or minus 20%. So that possibly indicates that the contract is drafted in such a way that variations where the contract sum is not influenced by plus or minus more than 20%, there is no entitlement to additional prelims. That generally would not be a standard clause, but it appears to me that this contract may have been amended to include such a clause, in which case it will hinge on the exact wording of the amendment and what was intended by the parties when they agreed to that amendment.
Nina, he's finished.
Okay. Let me just have a quick scan through, see if we've got any more questions. Okay. Right, I think that's it for the list. Oh, no, wait. Okay, question from Ahmed. Is time impact analysis generally more admissible than impacted as planned in arbitration or litigation?
If anyone can hear me, yes, time impact analysis would be better than an impacted as planned. Impacted as planned is completely theoretical and doesn't measure any actual. If you do a time impact and you use Windows, then you should be recording actually what happened. But an impacted as planned is pure theoretical, and arbitration litigation, yeah, it won't work.
Okay, thanks, Lee. Right, that's it for the question list. And given the issues that we're having with the audio, probably a good idea to end things there today. Just before you go, just a couple of announcements. So We've been running these clinics since March now. We started weekly and then we dropped to bi-weekly. To keep things interesting, we're looking to change the format again. We'll now be doing them monthly, still open to both members and non-members. But we'd like to change things up a bit. We're thinking of keeping the clinic format, but also adding more guest presenters for you and more topics of a technical nature. So we'd just like to get your thoughts on that and let us know what you would like. So a survey's popped up on screen there. If you could pop your vote in. So would you like pure Q&A clinic format, the same as today? Pure technical topics, or a mix of both? I'll just give you a few seconds to answer. And just whilst everyone's popping their answers in, we're working out the schedule for October onwards. So as soon as we've got the schedule, the format, the presenters, expect invitations in your inbox to sign up. If you're not on our mailing list, make sure you are. There's links to sign up from the ICCP homepage. Yeah, we look forward to seeing you at the next session. Okay, right, we'll end the voting there. Thank you, everyone, for your feedback. Thank you to Bill and Lee for joining us again today. And we hope to see you at another session soon. And apologies again for the slight disjointed nature of today's clinic towards the end. And thank you, as always, for your patience and bearing with us. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.